Hi everybody, welcome to the Archaeology Lab here at George Washington's Mount Vernon. My name is Sean Devlin. I'm the Curator of Archaeological Collections. This is my colleague.
I'm Lily Carhart. I'm the Archaeological Fields and Lab Technician.
And we're really excited to have everybody inside today to get a chance to see sort of what we do with archaeological objects. Lots of folks get to see outside. Very rarely do we get to have folks sort of come in and sort of see what happens inside, so we're excited to have this opportunity today to talk to you. We're particularly excited because with the upcoming weekend events this weekend at Mount Vernon, in association with Virginia Archaeology Month and our own Day of Archaeology here at Mount Vernon on Saturday, October 5th, we thought we'd sort of take this opportunity to show you all some objects that we have found over the course of, well, quite literally hundreds of years of excavations out here at Mount Vernon, and sort of give you perhaps a sense for some of the objects that we recovered from sites that we'll actually be covering in our new preservation tour that has an archaeological focus over the course of this coming month. We'll have that tour available 2 times each day this weekend, and then yes, and then following this weekend we'll have tours available on Thursdays and Fridays. So I believe there'll be a link in the video for that information. So please do that and ask us plenty of questions about what you're going to get to see today. So probably what we'll start out with is sort of the highlight items that people always sort of think about when they think about Mount Vernon, archaeology, etc., right? And one of those items that we found is this, it's actually a trunk plate, and it may be a little bit hard to translate onto the video screen, but it's actually inscribed with the words General Washington. So this is our George Washington item, right? This is actually a trunk plate that was, we have documentary records that Washington purchased trunks up in Boston at the start of the Revolutionary War, commissioned a local metal worker to engrave some plates to put onto those trunks, and those were the trunks he carried throughout the war. When he came home to Mount Vernon, apparently one of them was sort of broken and discarded, and we actually found this item in an archaeological site we call the South Grove Midden, which is sort of a fancy archaeological way of saying trash pit. And it's really a number of the items we'll see today relate to that site. One of the other sort of really amazing objects, and this sort of gets at the length of archaeological exploration here at Mount Vernon, is this glass seal. It's called a wine bottle seal, and you can see there actually molded into that is a A and W. So that stands for Augustine Washington. That's George's father. That's the man who actually first built the first iteration of our mansion house where it currently stands, and is really fantastic because this object, this wine bottle seal, was actually recovered in the 1930s on the east slope, so somewhat near where we are sort of excavating for our for the new necessary that was just found and announced on our Facebook page, and really sort of speaks to the long history of the Washingtons here on the property. But one of the real values that archaeology brings, I think, is not just to talk about folks like George and Augustine, folks that we might have great historical documentation about, but also to speak to sort of the daily lives of those folks and also all the other folks that maybe don't make it as much into the written records as might be more common with people like presidents like Washington. So of course that might be the enslaved populations that lived here at Mount Vernon over the course of all of its time as plantation. So we really have a lot of objects that speak to that community, to all the other laborers that are here, indentured whites, other folks who are here on the property across time. And that's kind of what some of these next objects are sort of dealing with. It allows us to speak a little bit about the types of jobs that people are doing, and really provides, I think, a rich context for what's happening here. How does this landscape look? How busy is it? In the front, we actually have a chisel fragment. That was recovered from our blacksmith shop, Excavations. It's really kind of interesting because that's probably a tool that was in the blacksmith shop to be repaired because it would have been having constant use, whether by indentured joiners that Washington's contracted to work on the mansion house itself, or possibly as well enslaved carpenters who are working on lots of the outbuildings that are around the plantation, sort of helping the plantation continue to operate as an agricultural enterprise. A little bit closer to home, literally here, a little bit closer to the mansion, are these objects, which are actually a dark green glass. What's kind of cool is that it's a little bit hard to sort of visualize perhaps at the moment, but these are actually the handles to bell jars. And if anybody's a gardener out there, you may know what a bell jar is. It's sort of a bell-shaped piece of glass that you put over usually a tender young plant as sort of the seasons change. It sort of helps you extend the season by protecting that plant overnight when maybe it's cold out and might kill it. And these objects were actually ordered by Washington from England. We know that there were folks in the gardens laboring to sort of grow food and also sort of botanical specimens. So it's really kind of a fascinating look at some of the material culture and different kinds of jobs that were taking place here at Mount Vernon. We also have next to it sort of objects associated with sewing, right? And this is kind of a nice, fascinating point because it allows us to speak as well about sort of, as opposed to sort of carpenters or these work that tends to be associated with men. We actually have documentary records of Martha working with enslaved women and girls, teaching them sewing, working with folks actually in the Washington's bedroom, which is fantastic. Sort of great combination of documents and archaeological evidence coming together. And these materials, again, sort of come from the South Grove. They also come from the House for Families, which is one of the main quarter sites that's on our, or places where enslaved people were housed on plantations. That's what a quarter is. But the House for Families site will also be on our tour, so we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that with folks. Of course, one of the biggest things that we find are ceramics, and sort of continuing that notion about what kinds of labor are people doing here. This is actually a milk pan, so it would be used in processing dairy in the kitchen here at Mount Vernon. It could also be sort of all-purpose vessel for food preparation and things like that. Again, this is kind of cool because it begins to sort of lead us into the notion of ceramics here at Mount Vernon, and we really get a chance to talk about a diverse array of objects that are coming from literally all over the world and are sort of being funneled into Mount Vernon through London, basically, and through England and other merchants in England. So to that end, we have just sort of in front of you an array, which maybe we could talk about a little bit later if folks are interested. But an array of ceramics that are, again, from a number of these different sites that we'll talk about on our tour: the House for Families, South Grove Midden, the Blacksmith Shop, and some other locations. But here we can see these are all plates. What we can kind of do as archaeologists is look at the very specific elements of color, form, decoration, and it helps us tease out different time periods. So we can tie that to documentation. We actually are fortunate enough to know when Washington ordered some of these records, and begin to tease out time using ceramics which are rapidly turning over at that time period. And maybe actually what I'll do is give Lily a chance to talk, because she actually does a lot of our cataloging with materials. So maybe I'll let her have a moment to sort of talk about that. Yeah.
So Sean just mentioned about all of the differences and all of these wide variety of different ceramics, which each one came in and out of fashion at a different time every 10, 20 years. But the way that we actually distinguish between the two is where things get a little bit more detailed, I guess. So if you can see this gigantic large piece of German stoneware over here, we have lots of sort of reconstructed vessels like this in all of the cabinets around this room. They actually help us identify the small itty-bitty pieces that are coming in from the excavations in the fields. It does not come out of the ground looking like this, ever, at least not here. So right here is another piece of a similar type of stoneware vessel. You can see that it has the really small incised lines, the very detailed botanical patterns, and the very, very rich bright blue and that the gray is actually pretty light colored, which is the same as this one, and it's fairly thin. So this one right here is also a stoneware, but it is a very different type. This is actually American made, and even though it also is gray, it also is blue, it also is a stoneware. If you look at the thickness, it's really dense, it's really dark, it's much darker clay, it's much thicker. The decoration on it as well is not that fine, detailed, bright blue. It's a wide, brush strokes with little stamp, and actually that stamp tells us it's from a pottery in Alexandria. So that's sort of an example of how we're able to figure out how we're able to distinguish one type of material from another.
So it looks like maybe we have a question that just came in.
Yes.
So that'd be great.
Yeah, Cindy is wondering, she says, some pieces you seem to have many of the same piece. Is that just a lucky find, or is it due to where it was located?
That's a really great question.
Yeah.
So part of the variation you're seeing here in terms of, say, this sort of porcelain plate, which has got a large portion of it together, versus this piece of stoneware over here, which is just a singular sherd, is what we call a fragment of a ceramic, is because we've actually had staff and volunteers come in and mend individual sherds together to form this plate. And that's actually a layer of one of the analyses that we do, right? So as Lily was just discussing, we sort of go through our objects as they come in, we classify them, we think about what kinds of forms they might be, and that's sort of our basic level of cataloging. That's what we do in here, right? And then we use that information to make interpretations about the site and about the past. Another level of analysis is actually taking all those individual pieces and laying them out on a table, right? And actually treating it almost like a jigsaw puzzle. And sort of beginning to stitch the smaller fragments back into their original vessel forms if we're lucky. Now, almost certainly we'll never get a complete vessel even doing that process, because fragments will have scattered, either when it originally got broken, when it got deposited archaeologically, maybe that trash pit got intersected by a utility line sometime in the 1950s and material got moved around. So we almost never get a complete vessel, but these really whole portions are sort of the product of that hard labor and work that I was just talking about, and it's also kind of cool not only does it tell us more about the vessel itself, that this is from a milk pan as opposed to just sort of an unidentified kitchenware, but it also allows us to sort of, because we know where each of these objects came from in terms of their archaeological context, right, the soils in which they came from. And we excavate soils that are different colors and textures, and we keep those objects separate from each other. We can actually begin to sort of say, okay, we can relate those layers together in time. Say if something's really low in the stratigraphic sequence, and we have let's put it this way, if we have two trash pits, this is better. If we have two trash pits, and we have objects that mend from those two trash pits, we know that they were probably open at the same time. People were depositing trash there, right? A single plate broke in the middle of a room, part of it got swept up and put out, out the front door, and part of it got put out the back door. We have an idea about when those trash pits were being used then. So that's the types of extra analysis we do, but maybe there's another question as well.
Hold on, one last little bit. But to speak to that too, you asked about numbers, but it does matter if we find more of, let's say, a large earthenware that looks like this all together, or if we are finding more, let's say, porcelain all together. The quantities of the different types of materials plays into our analysis of what types of activities took place. Whether it's dining, whether it's food preparation, whether it's tea or things like that. It can indicate different things happening.
And that leads us to a question we got yesterday. We posted a picture of a bunch of pieces of pottery, and somebody asked, were these pieces trash in a pile, or were they broken during the turnover of the mansion?
Yeah. The ceramics that particular picture are actually from a much later. Actually, it's kind of fascinating because it cut through the South Grove area, which is just by the midden, this trash pit that I was talking about, and it's probably actually it's behind the kitchen, so it's probably a work yard. For roughly about 100 years, that space was always sort of housed the kitchen of the plantation. and the space behind it was probably a work yard for most of that time. In the late 40s, yeah, our landscape team at the time decided to sort of recreate the South Grove by transplanting a large holly tree. And they dug a very large hole in the middle of that site.
Very large hole.
And well, it's kind of an interesting look, though, because it does talk to what we were just speaking of. All the archaeological material that was there that they dug out of this big hole to put the tree in, it was all jumbled up, but it was still there, right? So they dug this hole, put the tree in, and then filled the dirt back around the root ball, basically. So we excavated that in the...
in 2015 is when we actually dug the hole, but we've been working on that project. We just closed it up, so
yeah,
it's exciting.
It's one of our contemporary projects.
Yes.
So, so that's where those materials came from. So we get some of it's like that. Some of it is like this midden site that I was talking about is very much an active trash pit. The House for Families is actually a cellar. So the very bottom layers of that are probably actually just bits and pieces that people are either dropping or sort of working their way down to the bottom of the household, and are not necessarily deposited there as trash, but just sort of are the things that are ending up. Later, that cellar ends up getting filled up with purpose dumped garbage, etc. So it really varies. That's sort of the short and sweet answer, is that it varies quite a bit, but actually understanding how things got into the places that they are is actually one of the layers of interpretation and analysis that we're doing here as a whole team. That really ties in the field needs to know exactly what they're doing and sort of recording that information. We try and contribute the information from the artifactual analysis, and then we bring it all together to try and bring these better interpretations about life in the 18th century that way.
Nice. And we have another question from Amy. She's wondering what the oldest object that has been found on the stand is.
We actually don't have too many of the. We actually have a lot of lithic material. There's an extensive Native American occupation here for literally thousands of years before the Washingtons come. It dates back to the Archaic period. I will not put an exact number on things, but sort of the date ranges for that are generally the Archaic period. So actually very roughly, and understanding that things in that period end up getting date ranges rather than a date. They can be as old as roughly 6,000 years ago, all the way up through a couple of thousand years ago.
We'll be talking more about that in November.
Yeah,
so.
Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that in November.
Yes.
I would say just on the table, certainly, the Augustine Washington bottle seal is probably one of the older objects we have here. It's certainly one of the few objects we know we can associate with George's father's period here at Mount Vernon, from the archaeological collection, I should say.
Yes.
And we did have a question about Washington era objects specifically. Clay is wondering what the average depth of which Washington objects are found.
That can really, really, really vary. It can be, because it depends what has been done to the landscape since, what the landscape looked like before. If, for example, in the Washington period, the ground out, for example, behind where the kitchen workyard was, and the slope and east lawn and all of that area, the ground was really irregular. There were pits here and there, so filling those in with trash can be really deep, but it can also be, a couple inches underneath modern surface. So it really depends upon what types of activities are taking place and what Washington did to the landscape, what we have done to the landscape.
And it can vary quite a bit too, as Lily started talking about what is the context in which things are coming out. So again, to return to the House for Families, which we'll be able to show folks, or at least the location where that was. The cellar that was there was sort of shoulder height deep when we were excavating it, plus a couple of feet that have been removed to sort of more modern material that have been filled in with utility lines, etc. So you would be a full person's height below ground and getting that Washington era material. The site that we excavate at the sort of slave memorial and cemetery site where we're sort of documenting an African American cemetery that was there. That's actually ironically also where we're getting a lot of the prehistoric / Native American material that we're actively excavating at the moment. there, that sort of thousands of year old artifacts are literally less than a foot, sort of down below the topsoil. And that has to do with what Lily's sort of talking about, sort of the cultural processes and the natural processes that are happening out in the landscape. So there can be a relationship between depth and time, but it needn't always be deeper is older.
Or
so
1 inch equals
a certain
50 years nowadays.
Yeah.
It's not always that exact.
Yeah.
We have another question from Donna. She's wondering how much jewelry shows up.
That's a great question.
That
actually.
is a very good question because we just had a visit from a woman who reproduces a lot of jewelry that either from here or from other places. We do find, more so than jewelry, I would say, we find articles of personal adornment. So things like buttons and buckles and pins and things like that. So we do have a couple that are over here. They can be very, very basic and straightforward, but here are some examples of more heavily decorated styles of buckles. So we've got a copper alloy button face that has all these geometric patterns on them that are molded. You've got a more simple buckle, but then also one that has a more ornamental design as well. And again, they vary, and we find them not as often as we find something like various pieces of ceramic, but they are not uncommon, I would say.
What's also really fascinating too is I think this is one thing that we always try and emphasize, obviously here as part of our job, but it's sort of intensely looking at these objects and these are a bunch of buttons, but they're actually really fascinating stories about the production and different techniques in which they're made, and also that relate to time as well. So again, it sort of all comes back to helping us tell a richer story. So some of these buttons are actually, as Lily said, this is a copper alloy button that's actually all copper alloy. It's a disc that has been stamped out of a sheet of copper alloy and then decorated with this decoration up on the face, as you can kind of see. The cover that she pointed is actually usually attached to, most often it's a bone backing. And we actually have one of those bone backings here. It's for a different button, obviously. But this sort of, despite the greenness here, that's actually bone, a bone button back that would have been cut from bone on a lathe and then drilled with the sort of eye holes that would have then been sewn. It might be possible to see, I'm not sure if it's going to come through on the camera, but right here where sort of the little bit of the edge is broken, the last bit on the edge there is actually the copper alloy sheeting that was punched out and decorated just like this one and bent around the bone button backing. So there's a little groove right there that's actually meant to sort of receive that crimp of the metal face of the button. Here's an example of a bone button that might or might not have been covered by metal. You can see we don't have any green coloration on it, so it doesn't look like copper. The green coloration on that other button actually is from the copper alloy weathering on it, right? So it's caused that discoloration on the bone. This one that doesn't have any green discoloration may actually have been wrapped in fabric, which is another style of button that was sort of prevalent in the 18th century. So again, sort of there are even things like buttons or buckles you can really drill down in on and sort of see different forms of manufacturing. You can really get to as well, right? We can now start talking a little bit about what would the items of clothing that people would have been wearing, even down to, do they have metal buttons? Would those buttons have been shiny, sort of yellow, or would they have been plated with silver or tin? Would they have been cloth covered, right? And that means to help us, again, get back to this always present question that we have about what was life like back then, right? And how can we use these objects to sort of talk about how people are using them in their daily lives? Looks like maybe another question.
Yes, and we got a couple more actually. So Pfeiffer Dave would like to know how often do you find coins from the time period?
Less commonly than everything else. Not very often, I will say. I mean, we, in addition to finding, well, I don't know if we have a couple actual full-size coins, but we also find coins that have been cut in half and quarters and eighths that are used for their basically weight value of silver as opposed to the coinage itself. but not very often. It's going to be a handful. We find modern pennies a lot more, or pennies dating to the 1800s, but yeah, that sound about right?
Yes, yeah.
And Clay has another question. Of the items you've cataloged, what has been the most difficult item to identify?
The ones that are still unidentified?
Yeah, exactly. The ones we don't know. That's right.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what I'm always struck by is there are and Lily is doing a lot more hard-nosed cataloging than I am some days, but I am always sort of struck by the fact that with a little bit of extra work, things that were unknown can kind of radically snap into focus. And we're lucky here we have a large staff, and some of them are experts at identifying particular kinds of objects. Personally, I sort of gravitate towards ceramics. Lily has a background and interest in sort of metalworking, ironworking, so we have nice complementary skills. Another staff member of ours, Sierra Medellin, who works as our digital preservation specialist, is really fantastic at looking at clothing items, and has provided us some really fascinating information and hard work in that regard. So yeah, you sort of have to accept the fact that you can't know everything necessarily. And we also do...
Definitely. And we revisit things as well. Like we'll, for something that's very bizarre, we'll have photographs taken. Sometimes we'll even keep it out so that if other people come to visit the lab, we'll say, oh, any ideas? Because for some reason, it's slipping our mind. We can't figure out what this is. We've actually we post about that on Facebook often and try and crowdsource help, basically. For example, our head of horticulture and head of operations and maintenance helped us identify something, which were lightning cable tree spikes. You know, that was pretty bizarre too, because it looked like something we thought we should know, but had no idea what it was itself. So.
And Lily raises a really good point. We're fortunate here at Mount Vernon that we work with a bunch of other professionals in their own field. So we're housed within the same sort of department as our architectural colleagues. So they are literally in the next room. I cannot count how many times I've brought objects over there and sort of said, hey, have you guys seen this in 18th century material? And the same with our curatorial and collections colleagues. They have the material that never made it into the ground. They have the stuff that folks sort of preserved. And we're able to really sort of go back and forth between each other and sort of compare the objects that we have, hopefully for everybody's benefit in that regard. So, yeah, we've got a community here in the lab, here at the estate, and then we draw on that broader community as well out there in the world.
So I think we have time for just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
So Karen is wondering if you found any items related to the sundries that George Washington ordered from Robert Carey and Company in London.
Now that is a great question. I don't know if we've got anything that I would want to put out there at the moment. But what I will say is use this as an opportunity to talk about the great documentary records that we have here at Mount Vernon. So exactly that question about Robert Carey. I know we've got somebody in the know on the other end of Facebook Live. But we have actually, in some cases, we have order records that George Washington is sending over to the merchants that he uses in London in that case for this Robert Carey merchant house. And the way that would sort of work, just for folks who maybe are not familiar, planters like Washington would take basically their agricultural produce and ship it over to England to be sold. That money that they would make from the sale of that would then be used as sort of credit to buy up a list, a series of goods that they might have sent orders over for. So, and then those goods would be shipped back here to America. So we've got some really great order records from prior to the Revolution that allow us to sort of document really when did George Washington order certain things like creamware ceramics or white salt glazed stoneware ceramics for his table. So that is a real sort of benefit that we have that a lot of other places don't actually have, is that strong documentary record that we can kind of play back and forth with.
And we have a couple questions about digs, which I know is not exactly what we're doing here today, but folks are wondering how frequently do digs occur at Mount Vernon, and then somebody else wants to know how do you decide where to dig?
Those good questions.
We can maybe, I think those are great questions for our field crew. I will sort of suggest maybe that the work that we do is sort of driven by the needs of the estate, as well as research questions. And maybe in the next Facebook Live, our field crew can discuss a little bit more about how those two priorities sort of track.
Or you can go meet them at,
Yeah.
at the excavations. We do have, we can't answer that one.
Yes, yes.
We have ongoing excavations every day. We have 2 sites, Monday through Thursday usually will be out on the east slope at the old necessary. So if you're on the mansion, it's out to your right. And on Fridays we're at the Slave Memorial and Cemetery. Stop by.
Yeah. And maybe we'll end with this one. We've got people asking what the coolest object is, and then maybe, help you narrow it down.
Oh,
What's
yeah,
been your
yes.
most rewarding favorite find for each of you?
Okay.
Most rewarding favorite find. All right, well, I'm going to take you guys over here a little bit and talk about things that we haven't really got to see so far. So these 2 boxes down here are some of our more modern artifacts that we come across. Just to quickly go over them, we've got a light bulb from the earlier 20th century, Gumby toy, a brownie ring, a Monopoly piece, and 2 tokens from the electric railway that came from Alexandria to Mount Vernon from the end of the 19th century through the 1930s. And up here we actually have pieces of an umbrella, which is kind of fun. So all of this speaks to the tourism that occurs at Mount Vernon all the time. And to me, it's actually some of the most interesting elements of all of this is also who's visiting Mount Vernon and how do we as archaeologists keep finding evidence of that over time. So those have been kind of the fun ones.
I'll maybe do the dorkier, more boring answer, because those are really fun. I think those are some of the coolest objects we have to sort of speak to visitors here.
Yeah.
But I would also put in a plug that sort of the archaeological approach to stuff is to stuff.
Yeah.
Is that all of it has a story to tell, and I will say this: I've been lucky enough to work here for 3 years so far, and what I've been constantly surprised by since starting here is how, that trunk plate is fantastic. It's got a great story, but even little pieces of window glass have their own story,
Very
right?
much.
Sort of learning about how things were made, how things were used. All of it really comes together, and even the most lowly object can have a really exciting, invigorating story to tell. So that's sort of my little bit there. Yeah.
Sums it up pretty well.
Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Can you just remind us again how people can come learn more?
Yeah, we're doing Archaeology Day this Saturday, October 5th. I always get the dates wrong in my head, but I believe it's 5th. So we'll actually have 2 tours, archaeology tours available that day. There'll be a number of events put on by our education team that sort of are focused on engaging families of all ages with archaeological concepts and ideas, activities. And then you can see Lily and I in the greenhouse here at Mount Vernon, where we'll be hosting a sort of Meet an Archaeologist event in the afternoon of that day. I believe all that information is also up on the website in terms of times and things like that. And of course, we're here every day, and you can always reach out to us. We love to answer questions or talk to folks.
All right. Hopefully we'll see you guys this weekend.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us.
Yeah,
too.
thank you.
Thank you.